This almond and chocolate twist bread is beyond fluffy. Here's how you can make it. First, add 150 milliliters of warm milk to a large bowl. Doesn't need to be hot, just about body temperature. And the reason for that is because the next ingredient we're adding is active dry yeast, which needs a warm environment to activate. So after the milk and the yeast have been combined, add 1 egg, followed by 1.5 tablespoons of honey, which is also going to help feed the yeast and sweeten the dough. Then finally add 1 tablespoon of melted and cooled butter. And in hindsight, I think mixing this with a whisk would have been a better option. But our little spatula did the trick. Alright, so now it's time to add the dry ingredients, starting with 300 grams of all-purpose or plain flour, as well as about half a teaspoon of salt. As a general rule, it's usually best to measure flour by weight instead of volume. Once you've mixed it together to form a sticky dough, cover and let rise in a warm place for 1.5 hours. And in the meantime, we can make the almond and chocolate filling. Start by beating 1 egg in a small bowl. And make sure you whisk this really well because we want the egg white and the egg yolk to be perfectly combined. Once your egg is beaten, remove about half a tablespoon or 10 milliliters to use as an egg wash later. Then to the remaining egg, add 2 tablespoons of white sugar, followed by a pinch of salt. Then you're just going to whisk this all together again until it's combined and add a teaspoon of almond extract. And honestly, we could have added the almond extract with the sugar and the salt before mixing, but we just kind of forgot. So after that's all mixed together again, it's time to add 2/3 of a cup or 70 grams of ground almonds, as well as a 1/4 cup of mini chocolate chips and 2 tablespoons of room temperature unsalted butter. And you definitely want to make sure that the butter is room temperature or softened because we need to mix this all together, and having cold butter will make that really hard. After the dough has risen for 1.5 hours, it should be doubled in size. You can remove it by gently scraping down the sides of the bowl. It's still going to be quite sticky, but don't worry about that. Just transfer it to a lightly floured surface and then sprinkle with more flour. Now we want to form this into a ball, so fold all the edges in towards the center and press firmly. Then flip it over and spin it around on the counter a couple times until you have a nice smooth ball. And it might seem impossible, but we want to form this dough into a square. So first gently flatten it with your fingertips and stretch it out a little bit. Then it's time to bring out the big guns, a rolling pin. So applying even pressure throughout, roll the dough into a large oval. To achieve this, you're going to have to roll in both directions, up and down and side to side. And here's where we get into shaping it into a square. Once you have your oval, fold the curved sides in towards the center to form straight edges. Or relatively straight. And now we just need to roll it out a bit more to solidify those edges, then you can use your rolling pin to press the edges to make them straighter. Obviously, it's not going to be a perfect square, but we did our best. And all the sides should be roughly 30 centimeters in length. So now you're going to grab your filling and you're going to spread it over 2/3 of the dough. And you don't need to be perfect here, just try to get a roughly even layer. Now the reason why we only spread it over 2/3 of the dough is because we're going to fold the dough in thirds with the naked portion in between the two filled sides to separate them. So now you should have a long rectangle of dough which you can then cut into 8 portions using a bench scraper. And it's easiest to do this by first cutting the whole thing in half, then cut those halves in half, and then those halves in half again. This will ensure that all your portions are even. Okay, so now for the fun twisty part. You're going to take 1 portion of dough and then gently stretch it out with your hands. Now by rotating the ends in opposite directions, carefully twist the dough 2 to 3 times. It's okay if some of the filling falls out here, just transfer it to an 8-inch baking dish where all the pieces should fit snugly. And now this needs to rise again until it's doubled in size, so cover it and let rest for about 1.5 to 2 hours. Then once it's risen and it fills most of the pan, brush on the reserved egg from before. This is going to give the top a beautiful brown color and a bit of a gloss after baking. And speaking of baking, you want to place this in a preheated 350-degree oven for about 15 to 20 minutes. Then once it's cool enough to remove, you can tear it apart with your hands and see how fluffy it is inside. If you like this video, click on one of these other great ones and subscribe for more amazing recipes.